Welcome, another episode, Dr. James Beckett Sports Card Insights here with Rich Klein. We're going to talk about Jimmy Wynn, the toy cannon, just passed away. But first, thanks to our sponsors, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, ComC.com, Heritage Auctions, Huggins & Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, Upper Deck, Panini, and Topps. So thank you, sponsors. Thank you, listeners. And welcome, Rich. Rich, this was your idea. We were talking about getting together. And as most listeners know, getting together means virtual these days. So Rich and I are having kind of like a Skype call, kind of a Zoom call, where we can see each other, taking visual cues. But we are basically going to do as close as we can to an in-person interview about what was, Rich, your first favorite player.
My first favorite player was Jimmy Wynn. When I started following baseball in 1967, Jimmy Wynn had a great year. He had 37 homers in the Astrodome, which you didn't realize at the time, but 37 homers in the Astrodome is an amazing accomplishment. He had 107 RBIs. He'd actually today be considered a much better player than he was then with the low batting average, because he also, even though he struck out a little too much, he walked a lot. And so as such, and he was a good defensive center fielder, so he could do a little bit of everything. I think today he'd rake in a lot more money than he did in the 60s and 70s.
Oh, absolutely. He'd be probably a sabermetric darling. I looked it up because I'm not like you. I have to look up some of these things, but I realized he's in the all-time walks list. He's 56th of all the players ever of baseball. So the sabermetrics, all the advanced metrics would love his. He was a slugger and a good on-base percentage. So he and playing in, not to be underestimated, playing in the Astrodome was a pitcher's delight and a hitter's. Not a graveyard, but you could look at how many home runs he had. I bet he had a lot more home runs on the road than he did
I think what shows how good of a player he really would have been was the first year he got out of Astrodome, just as his athletic peak was starting to dwindle, and the year he had in '74 for the Dodgers.
But the Dodgers was a pitcher-friendly park too.
But it wasn't as bad as the Astrodome.
Maybe not as bad, but wow, that guy, his peers really respected him. That's another thing that is awesome. I noticed that he's in the inaugural class of the Astros Hall of Fame, deservedly.
And what's interesting is he has a fascinating card career, too. He has 14 years of Topps cards, no breaks. He has a few tough cards. He has a bunch of interesting inserts. And as such, he's like the perfect guy if you really want to do an interesting type collection of 60s and 70s cards.
Well, it could get expensive because he's on the rub-offs. He's on the all these other candy lids. He's on these difficult, what was the punch outs, coins. He's in a bunch of the Venezuelan sets and the OPCs. And so he obviously was highly esteemed by Topps because they had lots of players to pick from. And he was one of their go-to guys for even their special sets, the bazookas. If you tried to be an exhaustive Jimmy Wynn collector, in the 60s, obviously late 60s, early 70s, you wouldn't necessarily go broke, but there's some very challenging test issues and ancillary issues for Topps. So Topps really thought he was well respected.
Well, and if you're trying to do one player from every team, he's the Astros star in those days. And as such, he's the guy you choose. Cedeno comes up in 1970. It takes a couple of years to establish himself. So Wynn has that period of 6-7 years where he is the Astros guy.
And Joe Morgan was probably similar to Cedeno, that he didn't really emerge until the very late 60s, and his best years were with the Reds. So he came up as well. In fact, he's probably pretty contemporary with Jimmy Wynn.
Yeah, and all these guys from the 60s whose numbers got ruined by not just where they played, but the fact that it was such the pitcher's era. You hear a guy like Vada Pinson, who probably could be a Hall of Famer with just a little bit of a break here and there. And then you look at Willie Davis, and if you model his career into a normalized atmosphere, you see what he does in 62 and 69, and you realize those years where you think he's wandering in the desert, it's just the pitcher's era, and he can't do much.
Right.
And so anybody who did anything in the 60s had to be, extraordinary. And you're right about the type issues, but even the regular issues for Jimmy Wynn can be a little bit challenging. And you have 72 high numbers. As you said, the 71 OPC is a really tough card. And to me, even at the end of his career, his last regular issue card is a 77 Topps Burger King. He's number 22 in the set because Topps went in order. Well, even though he was about gone by that point, because they put him in, they missed a guy named Lupinella. Yeah. And that's the reason why Lupinella ended up being a short print, was that Jimmy Wynn took his place in 77 Burger King Yankees and created one of the first manias of people chasing down, figuring out how to con And, we talked about cheaters a few weeks ago. This is a moral type of cheating, but people trying to con the Burger King managers into giving them the 77 Burger King Pinellas, including, from what I remember reading, people dressing up as like little league coaches trying to get them. Oh, give them to so I can give them to my kids, who play.
So I need a handful.
They play, we're paying $10 each.
Yeah. I get you. One of the ways that I've told people to evaluate, especially older players, is how many All-Star games they appeared in, and that also is not very unfair to Jimmy Wynn, because he couldn't make the All-Star team. Well, wait a minute. There's a guy named Willie Mays, Roberto Clemente, Hank Aaron. If you're in National League, which, hey, listeners, Astros were National League in those days. If you were a National League outfielder, you were probably not. You weren't going to be a starting outfielder for the National League team in those late '60s, early '70s years.
No, and if you think about it, not only do you have Mays, Clemente, Aaron, Pete Rose moves to the outfield for 7 years. Rico Cardi wins a batting title with like a 342 or 365 batting average one year. Matty Alou has a 342 batting average championship. I mean, all these guys are just having great years in the outfield. Rusty Staub is the guy for the Expos, Le Grand Orange.
Right.
By the way, a teammate and basically another contemporary of Jimmy Wynn. He lasted even longer, but just another guy who lasted forever.
I was reading up on this, and I he's the toy cannon. And I thought, well, I wonder how, Joe Morgan was also kind of a smaller sized guy who went on to a Hall of Fame career, but as an infielder. But, would he be like Mookie Betts? He was supposedly like 5'9", 160, and that actually sounds, but he had to be very muscular to have that much power.
Well, you're muscular, and you also have really quick wrists. Hank Aaron talked about the wrists. He was a normal sized baseball player, if not a smaller baseball player. Willie Mays wasn't that big. Morgan hit 25, 30 homers when he got to Cincinnati and had his best years. It's how good your swing is. It's not necessarily how much power you have. You don't have to be Aaron Judge or Ted Kluszewski.
Well, it seemed like back in the days, I mean, these smaller guys they had a smaller strike zone. And so, the Frank Howards, the Aaron Judges, these giant guys, they got a giant strike zone, and they have giant power too. But Jim Wynn, apparently he had lots of power. In fact, Aaron, a couple of similarities there. And number one, that 1 year where he came in second in the home run race to Aaron, when that may have been the year he came in like fifth in the MVP voting. But Aaron said, "Wow, if I only out homered him by 2, and he played in the Astrodome, my hat's off to him." And the other similarity is that Aaron, I think, also came up as a shortstop and was moved to the outfield. And Jim Wynn came up as a shortstop. And again, if you could hit, most high school players, a lot of the high school teams, if you're the best player, you play shortstop. And then you get to the major leagues, you're an outfielder, because shortstop is way more demanding. And but he was a good fielder in the outfield. And what's your favorite card of? I know what card I would be looking for. I have two. What would you?
Favorite card, and it's not. I happen to just love the rookie card. It's a Houston Colt 45 card. It's a reasonably accessible card, but it's popular enough where you can just have it and say, "Oh, what a nice career he has," and who knew where this would lead for Jimmy Wynn. The All-Star games, the 74 World Series, playing for the 77 Yankees, albeit briefly, with the monster home run he hit on opening day. It's interesting. Then you can say, that card talks to me that this guy's going to have a decent life and a decent career. And there's nothing, we're both not as young as we used to be, but there's nothing wrong with thinking, isn't it nice to know that this person ended up with a nice life and a nice career?
He did, and he died at 78. He was 78, which again is seeming not very old. And,
and he had
condolences to his family.
He had some health issues. Yeah. He was in a wheelchair. He could get out of the wheelchair. He wasn't a quadriplegic, but he stayed in a wheelchair for most of the last few years of his life. There's video of him or people talking about him at the Astros Sabre Convention. I shouldn't call it the Sabre Convention in Houston, where he comes in a wheelchair, but he makes it a point to get out of the wheelchair as often as possible to shake people's hands, which I realize today shaking people's hands isn't quite the same as it was 5 years ago, but it's the same principle that he was really trying to be a gentleman.
Yeah, I have more than one friend that's in a wheelchair, but one of my friends, he predated the coronavirus because he always has been a fist bump guy. And so I think those are the days and times we're living in. A couple things. One is, again, you have to be of a certain age, and it kind of predates your interest in baseball, but there's this phenomenon, the most politically incorrect sports team name of the Colt 45s, which was what the Astros were prior to 65. And one of the interesting things about that is an artifact. If you go back to the early, I mean, his rookie card is 64. Therefore, that's that last year of Colt 45s, which is a firearm for those of you who are not aware, a glorification of again, the Second Amendment protections to bear arms, which is controversial. But the interesting thing about that is that the team issues that he's, if I were going to go after a couple cards, the first card I'd go after as a tough card to go on my type card wall would be a 64 Topps Venezuelan. Much tougher than his rookie card, but same design, slightly different back color and all that stuff. But that's what I'd go after. And the second thing I'd go after with interest would be his a little bit oversized team issue, little mini poster things that like the J photo kind of things issued by the team. And the interesting thing about that is that you'd know it would be 64 if he's a Colt 45 as opposed to 65 where he's got the soaring stripes, the star of the Astros going across the shirt. Does that any appeal to you? 45 versus Astros?
The Venezuela card is really cool because you're right. It's the rookie card. It's the same thing I just said.
Yeah.
And it's a really tough card.
Right.
And it's a really tough card and anything better than about a BVG 4 or 5.
I'd be happy with a 5. I'd be happy with a 4.
Yeah. If you get a 4 or a 5 and a 64 Venezuelan, you have a really nice card.
I mean, you and I, shared the experience of going around the National looking for type cards, but can you imagine the lunacy of if you were a Jimmy Wynn collector and you stumble on at the National a BVG 4 or 5 Jimmy Wynn, and you pass on it because it's not in acceptable condition. I mean, what a joke. I mean, I don't know that I would see anything better than that. And so the fact that you and I were not condition freaks and really appreciated the card and understood that certain cards, you're going to really have difficulty finding them. If you look and look and look, it's better to get the bird in the hand. And that would be a fabulous card.
Part of me likes when I shop at the National now, but part of me misses the day of buying the type cards and chasing down the things that weren't in the almanac or the other books. And hey, this is really cool. And I've never seen it before. I know a couple times, Steve Taft, who's a basketball guru, sold me stuff. And then the next day he says, by the way, do you want to sell it back to me?
I know.
No, but it's okay, Steve, because not that I was perfect or you were perfect, but we had a pretty good eye at the National for getting what we needed.
Well, I hope those days return, Rich. I mean, I don't know that our National this year in Atlantic City is in jeopardy. It perhaps is. I hope it goes on. I hope it's the coast is clear and it's safe to do that. But again, those were good days. And let's end on this note, Rich. If you're walking the National this year, and let's be completely optimistic about it, and you see a card that's like what we used to see in the old days, and you did a fabulous job of this last year, even though you're working for ComC, just bring it to my attention, and I will go over to a certain table and scope it out because I'm still enjoying the thrill of the chase, and I know you are too. So thanks, Rich. Thanks, listeners. Thanks. We'll be back again tomorrow with another episode. Jimmy Wynn, you were underrated star player for the Astros and others, and you're missed. Condolences to your family. Again, listeners, be back again tomorrow with another episode. So long.